I want to build my first ever sleeper PC. Now, building a sleeper PC is something I've always wanted to do, but I've never really found the time and energy to work on one until now. Because this summer, my dad found this old PC that he built back in 2000 while he was cleaning out his office. And I'm pretty sure it hasn't been used in at least 15 years, so he was happy to get rid of it and give it to me. And rather than just recycling it, I wanted to give this old tower a second life. And thus, the idea for a sleeper PC was born. Now, my original thought was to do a totally blacked out, minimal RGB system where you wouldn't even be able to tell that this is a sleeper build from the outside. That really would have leaned into the whole sleeper idea, right? Since from the outside it would look completely ordinary, you wouldn't even know that it had high-end components in it. But then I thought, RGB adds at least like 15 FPS in game, right? Rather than like a blacked out minimal RGB setup, we're going all RGB. I'm talking RGB fans, RGB CPU cooler, RGB RAM, anything that can be RGB within reason is gonna be RGB in this case. But before I could really get started on this, I needed to figure out a plan for this case. Since by their nature, these old PC towers really weren't designed to be able to handle modern high-end components. First thing I need to check is if this motherboard and power supply follow ATX standards. ATX, or Advanced Technology Extended Standards, were created all the way back in 1995, and we've been using them ever since on computers. The ATX standard dictates both the size and mounting of power supplies and motherboards. And importantly, it also dictates the locations of PCI slots, which means if I want to add a GPU in here, I won't need to do any modification for it to line up with the nice little slots here that are built into the case. So before I plan out anything for parts, I need to check out the hole pattern for the motherboard and see if it lines up with ATX standards. And luckily for me, that's gonna be really easy. You can see that the standoffs stick through the back of this panel, and I have this handy dandy PCB template from EVGA when I bought one of their Kingpin motherboards a couple years ago. It shows you where they locate everything on their motherboard, which is nice, but more importantly, it has all the holes for an ATX motherboard. So all we need to do is slide this in here and see if the back of those standoffs line up. And if we zoom in close here, you'll see that all of these standoffs are sticking right through these holes. There's a bit of a piece in the way over here, but that standoff is also there, which means this case will easily accept an ATX motherboard. And by looking at the back, this power supply also appears to be using an ATX mounting pattern and is definitely big enough to hold a decent sized ATX power supply. That's perfect. That really limits the amount of modifications we need to make to this case. Well, we need to see what we can fit in here with our new system. As you can see, there is a lot of width here for a nice big GPU, so no problems there. Even a nice big 3-fan GPU should fit no problem. So we know our power supply, our motherboard, and our GPU and everything that mounts to the motherboard should fit in here, no problems. So what do we have to worry about? Well, cooling. As you might notice, there's not a lot of spots for cooling fans to pull fresh air into this case. The original system just has this one little fan on the front and a spot for a fan on the rear. So I started with what I knew I could fit. So I measured, and this has mounting for a 60mm fan. And they're not cheap, but I bought one anyways because look how adorable this is. This is a 60mm Silverstone PWM fan. And guess what? It fits perfectly. So we've got at least part of our cooling solution figured out. At $20, this probably wasn't really worth it, but it's so cute and adorable. I really like it, so I had to put it in there. Next is the most obvious spot. There was already a cooling fan up front, so we're gonna put another 120mm fan up there. Now this is an 80mm fan, so it's significantly smaller than what we wanna put in there, so we're gonna have to do some modifications to this front in order to be able to mount a 120mm fan. Main change we're gonna have to make, these standoffs are stamped into this front panel, so I'm gonna have to drill these out so I can drill new holes to mount our 120mm fan. I might need to add a couple more holes here just to get better airflow, but other than that, this should work fine for a 120mm fan. However, one intake fan is not nearly enough for the system I have planned in here, so we're gonna add 2 more. Down on the bottom, I'm gonna drill out holes for 2 120mm fans so we can get some nice fresh air into the system, right up into the GPU. But I don't want some really unsightly sharp holes at the bottom of my system, or the ability to just pull in whatever dust is in the air or on the ground beneath it. So I found these nice little vanity plates on Amazon. These little plates are a 3-piece design. The bottom plate gets bolted into the fan through the case. Then we have a nice little foam dust filter, and then a nice vanity plate to hold the dust filter in, as well as just give it a nice finish. And you're probably thinking to yourself, that doesn't really match the aesthetic of the case. We're gonna get some spray paint and we'll try and get this to match as closely as possible to the color of the case so it looks a little bit more natural. And last but not least for cooling, I want to use an all-in-one liquid cooler for my CPU. I don't really have anywhere to put the radiator. There's really not much room up front with our one fan. We're covering the bottom. We don't really want to put the radiator on the bottom anyways. And up top, there just really isn't a good place to put it with these racks in the way. So instead, I'm gonna put the radiator right here next to the motherboard. This should help make sure that the AIO pump, which is located on the CPU, is below the top of the radiator. And we'll get extra airflow because the 2 fans on the radiator are gonna act as exhaust. So we'll have 3 intakes and 2.5 exhaust fans. However, doing a little bit of measurement here, there's not a lot of space next to the motherboard to mount our radiator, so we're gonna have to be really careful where we put the holes to make sure that the radiator fits and doesn't come in contact with our motherboard. You'll also notice that this side panel, it's the same for both the front and the back, but there are no holes in here, and rather than drilling in more holes and putting in more of these dust filters, I'm gonna have my buddy over at 208 Laser Engraving cut in a hole pattern here that should hopefully give us plenty of airflow, as well as make it look a little bit more original to the case rather than 2 big covers on the end. Well, now that we have the case figured out, let's show you what we're gonna put inside of it. To start, we've got the Ryzen 7 7800X 3D. Now, this might not be quite as good as the 9800X 3D, but this is still a banging CPU and it's gonna play every game you can throw at it. Next, we have a Radeon RX 7800 XT. This one's from XFX. This will be perfect for playing any game you can want at 1080p or 1440p, and it should be able to handle streaming at the same time. Now on to the less fun stuff. We have an MSI Mag Core Liquid 240mm AIO. This is the same one that I made a video for not too long ago, so I already had it. Might as well use it, right? And the case that we chose is just way too tight to fit a 360mm AIO, so this 240 should be absolutely perfect. And in my previous testing, this AIO performs just as well as the old Arctic Freezer 360mm AIO. Next, for the motherboard, we have this Asus TUF X870 Plus Wi-Fi. This is a really good motherboard at a really reasonable price. You can get this for just $250. I know that sounds like kind of a lot, but this is a pretty high-end system, so I wanted to get a really good motherboard. For RAM, we have the CL32 6400 kit from Team Group. This is a 32GB kit. I use these in a lot of my builds. This is really good quality stuff made from Micron right here in Idaho, and it should be plenty for gaming and some streaming. To power the system, I have this 750 watt 80 plus gold power supply from Seasonic. I actually got this through a customer RMA, so it's technically brand new, but it's open box, so I didn't really want to use it in a customer build, so it's perfect for our sleeper PC. For storage, I've got a 2TB SSD from Team Group as well. This is an MP44L. This Gen 4 SSD can do 4,500 to 5,000 read-write speeds, so more than enough for this gaming PC. Next, I bought some really nice fans from Asia Horse. These are super reasonably priced, just $30 for 3 of them, and they look really good. They have the same sort of infinity mirror design as Lee & Lee, so these are gonna look really good when you open up that case. And lastly, this actually wasn't originally planned, but I've got a vertical GPU mounting kit. Based on where we decided to put the AIO, the GPU was actually going to clash with the fans on it, so I got this to move that GPU forward and put it vertically, so we have space next to our motherboard to put our AIO. Luckily for me, I already had the CPU, the RAM, the power supply, the cooler, and the tower. So all of that sort of cost me $0. First thing I had to buy was the motherboard. Back when I bought this one, it was $290. You can find it for cheaper now at around $250 or $260. The 2TB SSD from Team Group was about $102. Case fans ended up being $65. The GPU was $460. And all of the laser work that we did to the case was actually free. Next, the vertical mount for the GPU was $65, and the other assortment of stuff that I bought for the aesthetics, like the fan covers, beige paint, a couple of other little things, was $42. Putting that all together, that's a grand total of $1,042 for this PC, which is kind of a lot considering I already had a lot of the parts for this. Anyways, I think that's all for the planning phase, so let's get to the fun part, deconstructing this case so we can start our build. Well, there's really not much left to do on this except start pulling it apart so that we can start drilling all our holes for our fans. So let's get to it. Put down my nice protective mouse pad here, and we'll get to work. Cue the music. Super interesting, this thing came with a ferrite choke installed on the power and reset switches. I don't know if they really experienced a lot of voltage or current transients. It'll help keep voltages from spiking around within those wires. Super interesting, you definitely don't see these anymore, but maybe we'll reinstall it with the new system just in case. We've got our 1 stick of SimpleTech RAM. I don't know how much this actually has on it. Probably not a lot considering the actual storage only had 10 gigabytes, so this is probably in the range of kilobytes of RAM, but pretty cool. Interestingly enough, this actually has a Cooler Master CPU cooler on it. Kind of cool. And just to protect these while we're doing all the work, to pull out the power button as well as the reset switches and everything so that it's all completely empty when we start working on it. This is gonna be pretty much the only piece of the interior that we're keeping. And there we have it. We have an empty case with some pieces of foam left over. The only thing, these standoffs on the right-hand side were actually not in the correct spot. We're gonna have to move those over, so we might as well do that right now while we have everything out. And we're actually short 1 standoff for this bottom right, so I'm gonna move this center one down to the bottom right so it feels a little bit more structurally sound. And there we go. This is now ready to get worked on. We're gonna go take it over to my laser engraver buddy. I talked to him earlier. We're actually going to be able to cut out these standoffs. We're gonna be able to cut out the fan holes at the bottom as well as our holes for our radiator, all with his laser, so I shouldn't have to do anything with a hole saw or a drill. It should be all really nice and clean using a laser. Thanks to my friend Frank over at 208 Laser Engraving. He put in a bunch of work on this PC, so let's check out all the modifications we made. And I'm wearing my gloves already because some of this stuff is pretty sharp on this old case. First, we cut holes on the bottom for 2 120mm fans and holes for mounting them. Next, we removed the stamp pads that were up here on the front. Those held the 80mm fan that originally came with this PC, and now we have mounting holes for a 120mm intake fan on the front. And to help that front fan breathe a little bit easier, we drilled out a bunch of these squares so that there's nice open airflow rather than the really restricted vents that were in there before. After that, we took the motherboard tray out and we cut a bunch of squares here. This is gonna allow our 240mm radiator to exhaust that air out the back of the case. We also had to add in a few holes to mount the radiator just off to the side of the motherboard. This case is a really tight fit, so the distance between that radiator and the motherboard is only about 1/4 of an inch. I don't have the rear side panel back just yet, but we're also gonna be cutting holes that line up with these holes for the radiator so that that exhaust air goes straight out the side of the case. So that's all the big modifications out of the way. Let's talk about some of the smaller ones. You might have noticed early on that my case was missing one of its feet. I searched all over the place to see if I could find just a drop-in replacement so I could keep the original feet on there, but I just couldn't find anything. So instead I bought these nice little rubber isolators that are acting as feet, and they're just bolted through the case, and honestly, I think they're way better than the originals. It keeps it nice and steady, and they're nice soft rubber rather than the plastic that originally came with it. The next problem that we faced was the power button. While this original power button sounds really cool, it doesn't work with modern hardware because it's not a momentary switch. This is a latching switch. So once you press it once to close the circuit, it will stay closed, which doesn't work for a modern motherboard. For modern PCs, you want a momentary switch, which will close that circuit for just a fraction of a second and allowing that motherboard to know it's time to turn on. To solve this, I got a momentary switch. So one of the last things I'm gonna have to do with this build is figure out how to mount this switch behind this panel so that we can utilize the original power button but with a different switch behind it. I think in order to make that power switch work, we're really just gonna need a little bit of super glue and some JB Weld, and it'll work just like new. So now we know what's going in the PC, we know all the changes we made to the case to make it work. I think it's time we build this PC. Cue the music. I don't know how I messed this up. I put the standoffs in the wrong spot. I really thought we were gonna have enough width over here for a 240 millimeter radiator. It turns out we don't. So I'm gonna have to figure out how we're gonna cool this CPU. I think now we're gonna have to go with an air cooler, unfortunately. My plan is, we'll see if we can mount a couple of fans on the backside here just to get a little bit more exhaust air. Bottom two are still gonna be intakes, and this other one over here might also become an exhaust. So yeah, we'll see what happens. Well, until I can come up with a better solution, I've got this AMD Wraith Prism laying around, so we're gonna stick that on there for now, and we'll do some testing to see if this will actually adequately cool our CPU. Maybe not the best start to our sleeper PC build, but we'll see how it goes. Okay, so the bones of the PC are now in. There's a couple of things that we need to get figured out. One, These fans are too tall and they blocked access to our USB 2.0 port inside. So I need a USB 3 to 2 adapter over here to plug in my Wraith CPU cooler. Next, the Wraith CPU cooler uses 12 volt for the RGB instead of 5. We're going to need to get a hub that's powered off of SATA in order to run our RGB for that. And lastly, I need to get the power button working so that I can actually turn the PC on. Besides that, we're technically basically done, assuming this CPU cooler is going to do the trick. Well, as you can see, I've still got a long ways to go as far as aesthetics are concerned, but everything is plugged in and it should be working, so let's see if we can turn it on. Still don't have a power button in there yet, so I'm going to have to jump the pins. And let's see if it posts. Turned on though. Getting a DRAM light at the moment. I'm going to shut it down, do a hard boot, and see if that gets us. Okay, cleared the CMOS. Doing a hard boot. See if that gets it. Well, we're still stuck on a DRAM light here. Let's try taking one of the sticks out and rebooting it, see if that fixes it. This is a brand new kit of RAM, so it should be working fine, but I've definitely had RAM show up dead on arrival. And there it goes. We've got a boot light. It just didn't like that one stick of RAM. We'll make sure we get everything updated, and then we'll try putting that back in and see if it was just unhappy with it on the first boot. All right, so we got Windows installed, everything's up to date and ready to go, but I was trying to see if now that everything's installed and updated, I could run my dual channel RAM, and it doesn't seem to be working. I tried a bunch of different kits of RAM, I tried it in a bunch of different slots. It seems like the third and fourth slot are both dead on arrival on the motherboard, which means I'm gonna have to take this completely apart and swap out the motherboard for something else in order to complete the build. Now, that may sound like a big downside so far, but this does actually allow me a little bit of flexibility. So what I can do, instead of replacing this with an identical ATX motherboard, we can swap this out for an MATX motherboard. That'll give us a narrower width on the motherboard, and it'll be shorter, so we'll have access to all the ports. And since it'll be narrower, it should give us space to put our 240 millimeter radiator next to the board. I think this is a blessing in disguise because instead of having to cobble together finding a CPU cooler that would fit in here and, blocking off and only having access to a couple of the ports on the bottom, we're now going to have pretty much all the things that we wanted originally in this system, just with a smaller motherboard. So I guess now it's time to deconstruct the system again and get ourselves a different motherboard that actually works. All right, the new motherboard is here, so it's time to rebuild this with our MATX board, and hopefully we'll be able to fit our 240 millimeter radiator now. And just confirming there is no bent pins on that motherboard, so it definitely is dead RAM slots. It wasn't a bent pin, so just bad luck, I suppose.
Well, micro ATX board will not allow us to put our radiator in here. So we're stuck with our air cooling solution. And instead of our Wraith Prism, I've got a better one. Instead, we've got this ID cooling CPU cooler. And there it is, fully rebuilt. Our sleeper PC with this nice ID cooling CPU cooler. We've got our 7800 XT, 7800 X3D in there, 32 gigs of RAM, and a couple of case fans to help keep it cool. Let's see how it does. Let's see if we can at least get it to boot this time. We'll even plug my special power button back in. Here goes nothing. Hot dog! It posted. Okay, technically it's not done posting yet, but we got past the RAM light, which is really what I was concerned about. We have a working sleeper PC, y'all. All right, time to button this up a little bit with the aesthetics, and then we'll get to testing. All right, we got our power button installed. Everything else is kind of buttoned up. Let's see how it looks with the case on it. That button sticks out way too much. That's unfortunate. All right, so we got our power button fixed. I wasn't able to use the original bracket, but luckily this little power button fits right through that hole. It came with a nut, so I was able to tighten it right down. And now our fascia panel will fit right over the top. And now our fascia panel will fit right back over the top. Pushing this button in pushes that power button and it should turn on. So let's test it out. Here we go. There it is. Got a working power button, our PC is working, got our front panel back on. We're almost done with this thing. Let's give that front panel a little bit of a cleanup and then we're ready to go. Okay, performance time. Now I did run Cinebench and FirmArk before I tried out some games, and FirmArk ran fine. In Cinebench we did see some thermal throttling from the CPU, which is kind of to be expected because this case, even with the additional fans and airflow that we added, really does not have incredible airflow for our 7800 X3D. But I think we might be able to do some tuning in the BIOS to help bring those temperatures down a little bit and get a little bit more performance out of the system. Moving on to games. In Fortnite, we were able to hit 120 average FPS at 1440p high settings, with the 1% lows coming in at around 90 FPS. Then in Warzone on the big map, we were able to average 209 FPS with a 1% low at 89%. That 1% low is a pretty significant drop, and you do tend to see that a little bit more often with AMD GPUs, but this could also be the CPU pulling back a little bit due to temperatures. So I'm really hoping that with some BIOS optimization, we might be able to bring those 1% lows up a little bit higher.
Now, barring the optimization work, this project is almost complete, and there's one last little piece I wanted to add. I had my laser engraver custom make this little metal plate, and it perfectly fits right here on the case. We're gonna install this to complete the look, and then we'll give you a nice view of everything that we've done. Right here, I just got a little bit of 3M double-sided sticky tape. This stuff is super sticky, so I just wanna make sure that we get it on there in the right spot the first time. And there it is, the first Redneck Engineer sleeper PC. As a reminder, here's what we've got in the system. We've got our 7800X 3D, we've got our 7800 XT GPU, some Asia Horse 120mm Infinity fans, 32 gigs of CL32 6400 RAM, our Asus TUF B850M Wi-Fi motherboard, 750 watt power supply. We've got our ID Cooling SE207 XT CPU cooler, and a 1TB Gen 4 SSD, all inside this beautiful case from 2000. And as far as aesthetics go, these are glued-in floppy drive fascia from the original system. We've got the original optical drive in here as well. We added in this nice custom painted mesh panel to fill in that gap, and then a couple of filters and fascia pieces on the bottom, and these new rubber feet to keep it nice and stable. And there it is, my first ever sleeper PC. Hope you all enjoyed. We'll see you in the next one.